It's easy to think creativity is about the finished piece, but since learning 3D, it's really become about the process. The slow, repetitive, sometimes frustrating work that makes me feel most connected to the craft. The last couple of months I've continued to learn 3D and model various projects, including the motorbike project that I mentioned in the last video. Obviously I did this to not only carry on learning 3D, but also to figure out what do I actually enjoy about modeling in the first place. And this is important because if I am going to build a portfolio to get work, then I kind of need to reverse engineer it. I need to figure out what do I enjoy doing, then I need to find what types of clients value the thing that I enjoy, and then I need to tailor my portfolio to the ideal client. Now, as well as doing 3D, I also took a break and went to Bulgaria. It's taken almost a decade in my video career to learn that breaks are actually part of the process, and oftentimes I'm more in tune with the craft when I return. As long as I'm regularly in Blender and I'm continuously enjoying learning about 3D, then I'm good with that. This is what keeps me coming back without pressure. I want this video to be primarily focused around this big motorbike project that I took on, but before I got into that I needed to prepare. There were a few assignments that I needed to complete first. One thing I can't overstate is how good practicing modelling on small simple objects is. From little bolts to broader pieces that look bigger but fundamentally are super simple. These kinds of practice methods really cemented the things I learned into my brain. And I modelled these things not only for practice, but because they are going to be very useful later in the video. However, one of the objects that did give me a huge problem was this piston. Seriously, I spent over 3 days just redoing the block out on this object. I would believe I had it, only to get further down the line and realise my starting point was completely wrong. This was really frustrating, but I kept showing up, restarting, experimenting. Multiple days went by, until eventually I figured it out. Whilst I was away from my desk on a walk, I had an epiphany. And that's the weird thing about creative problems. Sometimes they don't get solved by brute force, but by stepping away. Of course, I'm not talking about anything new. We all know as creatives that for some reason, sometimes you just solve things by not doing the thing. But this is why I'm not chasing results. Even when days feel wasted, persistence and dedication is still building something underneath. Blocking out the object for the 500th time, I had solved it. And that was the moment I learned how the reflection of an object dictates its edge flow and direction of topology. This was really throwing me off to get the topology to run this way. Again, now that I've done it, it's super simple, and I think, why didn't I do that first? But that's only in hindsight, so I reckon now that the blockout's in, I should be able to push ahead. Once I figured that out, the rest of the piston was easy. But I'm really proud of myself for figuring it out after days of trying, literally. Those are the kind of wins that compound until eventually you're solving problems at the higher levels, and that's what it's all about. Starting the motorbike project was a little bit daunting because obviously it's so complex. Really, it just began with me getting started. I started out with a blockout and I tried to really focus on doing blockouts with primitive form. The main thing is that simple forms are supposed to build towards complexity. And I would argue this is probably one of the biggest hurdles to get over because look at the state of the project, like it looks so ugly. The real priority is this main highlight that goes through the body. This is one of the key features of the design language of the bike. And if you don't get it right in the blockout stage, it tends to drift off the further you go into the project, so a lot of attention needs to be given to getting this highlight right. There was also certain parts where I didn't know what to do because again, like my eye isn't trained for it. Like a big part of art, as I've mentioned in previous videos, you need to just get used to training your eye to see the way. When that happened and I couldn't see, I went back to Elementza's course and really just rewatched some of the sections that I needed to. And it always blows my mind when someone can just see the thing that is so obvious, but for some reason you can't. I've got to say as well, I really enjoyed breaking down the project into more sizable bites. My favourite things were modelling the handlebars, modelling the suspension, and modelling the brake calipers and the wheels and things like that. On the handlebar especially, it just isolated itself and really, this is where I enjoyed it. Like I put music on, I really dialed in and I just got it done, and there wasn't a single day for 5 weeks where I wasn't sat at my desk modelling, but I loved every second of it. Over the course of this project, I became super comfortable with Blender and I learned a lot, like using the 3D cursor to snap objects and anchor pivot points, and basically just have way more flexibility in the viewport. I was also comfortable enough to start altering some of Blender's basic hotkeys and default settings to better suit my own personal workflow. One of the big changes was mapping the local view and view selected functions to these two buttons on my mouse. I always really disliked how the local view framed the active object by default. Now when I go into local view, the viewport no longer zooms in. This works really well for me personally. It feels better, it's optimized. You don't get like thrown around the viewport as much just because you want to view an individual object. And the isolation feels a lot cleaner when you've got so many objects in the viewport. I also discovered this feature as well where you could add materials to the solid view when modeling. This was super helpful because it allowed me to see pinching on reflective materials whilst I was modeling. And yes, I know that we have matte caps, but sometimes the matte caps aren't really how I want them to be, and I know you can add your own matte caps as well, but there's way too much messing. So this was another workaround. Also, just a small side note, I keep hearing about how not to focus on topology, or at least don't worry about it too much, but the more I learn how important it actually is. For example, the tightness of topology on a bevel does dictate how lighting reflects off the edge of an object, and if the object is small or further away, then the bevels need to be loose to allow for reflections to be seen. There's also little things like when doing panel breaks, creating panel breaks by beveling with loop slide off. This gives a super clean and even break, but you get a different and sometimes cleaner result if beveling with loop slide on. It really depends on what you're panel breaking, but these things do really matter. And for me, I love learning about these very tiny niche minute details because it leads to more control when modeling and expertise in the future. Okay, so after... what day is it today? 12th September, it's 5 PM, and I think I've been on this for over 4 weeks now, and one of the things that really stood out to me was just being super patient with your project. Like, I think you do really need to get comfortable with, okay, I've just spent 2 weeks on the block out, right, now it's time to do 2 weeks of the primaries. You need to be okay sitting in the work. Some of the things that still need to be done, like I need to put the brake caliper, I need to put it on the back wheel. I also need to add like this little locket thing in this section just to make it so that the suspension is actually locked into place. There's also a few other things with like the alloy that I need to do, but overall, I'm really happy with where this is. Okay, I'm going to speedrun this section because there are quite a lot of things. I added the brake caliper to the rear wheel. I connected the exhaust to the engine, modeling these pipes. I did a little bit of research and referencing to finish the fork bracket for the steering, as well as did more research and added the brake cables. And I opted for this double brake function that joins together further up and then connects at the top. I also added the vents under the body, and finally some of the kit bash parts that I modelled earlier in the video, like the bolts and wheel axles. I've got to be honest though, there were a few hurdles along the way. Like on the suspension, I couldn't decide how much resolution was enough to allow a clean bridge to this separate cylinder. And I experimented with different cylinder segments and resolutions to see the differences. Looking back, I think a 16 segment cylinder with softer edges would have been enough because based on the context of the object, it wouldn't be seen up close anyway. But in the end, I opted to go with this 32 segment version. Oh, and there was a really big realization. Throughout the process of modelling the bike, I subdivided the body parts after certain stages. And as time went on, I started to notice a symmetry edge very subtly appearing at the front of the bike as well as on top where the gas tank was. So I fixed it to later find it back again, and I had no idea why this kept happening until I realised something important. Every time I subdivided the body of the bike, which was probably like 4 times throughout this entire modelling process, I never applied my mirror modifier first. This was a major error because this means every time I subdivided the bike, it subdivided as an individual half instead of a whole piece. So after multiple subdivisions at different stages, the body started to show morphed reflections pinching through the entire middle of the body. Now, the mirror modifier is still there, right? Let's just apply the subdivision. Look at what happened to that shape, and even when I apply a subdivision back to it, you can see that it just bows out. On a cylinder, this is really easy to see, but when you're modelling a motorbike where only a little bit of it is going to be like the joining line, you do not notice this. Now, on this cylinder, let's apply the mirror modifier, then apply the subdivision, and now, look, everything's okay. So let's delete half of it, and then get a mirror modifier to go back on there. Let's do it on the Y, and now look. We've subdivided and we've still got our perfect circle. It also explains why if we go to the bottom, you can see it just a little bit better. You see how there's just a little bit of a harsher line? That is not good. So that's a big lesson. Always apply the mirror modifier before applying subdivision. And honestly, don't even get me started on the decals for the tyres. When I originally started doing the decals, the shrink wrap modifier wasn't working. So I spent an additional 3 hours doing a janky alternative method and started having real problems when I had to duplicate the decals from the back tyre to the front tyre. The only problem was that the front tyre is smaller than the back tyre. This meant having to resize the decals, and just scaling it down in a normal way didn't work because even the bowing of the front tyre was a little bit different. Eventually, I used ChatGPT, which is a super helpful mentor for troubleshooting, and it turns out the answer to my shrink wrap problem was solved in literally 30 seconds. All it was to subdivide the decal mesh. If I had done this hours earlier, I would have finished the decals in no time, but no. I thought brute forcing the task would get it done faster, and this is why I now know to troubleshoot stuff first before changing the method at which you do it, because sometimes troubleshooting might only take 5 seconds. That would have saved me a lot of time. Spending so much time modelling the last few weeks has continued to just grow my passion for the craft. I'm excited to kind of just get out there and start making more, and I'm starting to consider what I could bring to the industry as a freelancer and what I can do for clients and things like that. I'm really happy with the time and the energy that I've spent putting into this 3D journey so far, and I'm excited to keep going. I just wanted to drop in this extra video clip because whilst I've been learning 3D over the last couple of months, I've been turning away video work. I've been turning away film shoots. You know, something I learned a long time ago was when you first try to turn your craft into a business, you immediately think that the thing that's going to make you unsuccessful is running out of money. You're going to have to go get a job. You're going to have to move back home with your parents. Whatever it is, you don't really put any thought into the fact that sometimes the thing that can change your direction is another good opportunity. That's kind of what it feels like when I'm getting offered video work. You know, it's calling into question how committed I am to what I'm aiming for with 3D. If you're watching this and you're aiming for something right now, like, it's just part of the process. Like, you are going to get stuff that sounds cool and would be fun, but it's also has to be sacrificed, basically. I think that's also what makes people take you seriously. And from that seriousness is how you get opportunities in the direction that you do want to go for. Some might think the decision to quit my video career doesn't make sense, or that it's an unnecessary risk. But those doom and gloom worries are exactly what was being said about the video industry when I first started my career in 2018. Throughout my life, anything I've ever pursued, I've done it with full, unwavering commitment. There's an intensity I'm willing to go to, and in some paradoxical way, there is no risk because of that. I don't have expectations of the industry, available work, market, or money. The only expectation I have is of myself.